Hi, my name is Ben Tronis with High and Dry Fishing Products. As an owner of a company that manufactures and sells floatants, I'm often asked, why use a floatant? For hundreds of years, flies have been tied with materials such as hair and feathers, which are hollow and hold air. By natural design, they float. But like all natural materials, hair, feathers included, they eventually become waterlogged or fish slimed. And so what floatants are designed to do is to, generally speaking, coat that material, create a water barrier, and to prevent that material from becoming waterlogged or fish slimed. As I mentioned, there's several different types of materials used to tie flies, including hair, such as elk hair or deer hair. And as you can see, hair is a great all-around material for a variety of different flies. It's coarser and denser, but also, as I mentioned, it's hollow and a great natural floating material. Another material that's used quite often and is becoming increasingly popular is what's called col de canard, or CDC, which is essentially feathers from a duck's butt. CDC is becoming very popular because of its natural buoyancy and its natural waterproofing. But CDC, as you'll see, is a much more delicate material. Because it's so delicate and fine, there are several other considerations that you'll need to think about when you're applying floatants. Many terrestrial patterns, like grasshopper patterns, are tied with foam, such as this terrestrial pattern here. And also terrestrial patterns such as ants are tied with materials like yarn. Like the other natural materials, yarn and foam can also become waterlogged or fish slimed. And so obviously floatants are designed to prevent that from happening. Just as there's a wide variety of fly tying materials, there's also a wide variety of floatant types and floatant brands out there. And every form of floatant has a specific purpose and a specific use. High and Dry manufactures 4 different forms of floatant, including a gel floatant, a liquid floatant, a powdered floatant, and a powdered floatant with a desiccant. And what I'll do is I'll go through all 4 of those different forms with you here today. The first form of floatant that High and Dry produces that we're going to talk about today is a gel floatant. Generally speaking, gel floatants are what's called hydrophobic or water hating. By design, they're intended to coat the fly materials and to prevent a water barrier so that the fly material has a more difficult time soaking in the water and the fish slime. What's great about gels is that it allows the fly fisher to apply the floatant only to the specific areas of the fly that person prefers. So they can get a little bit more technical about where that floatant is going. Gel floatants work well on the coarser materials such as hair. They don't work as well, generally speaking, on the more delicate and fine materials such as the CDC. Most of the gels out there tend to clump up that CDC and they are less effective that way. One other consideration that you want to think about when you're looking at a gel floatant is how it handles temperature variances. You want to make sure that you get a gel floatant that doesn't leak out of the bottle when it gets hot, and you want to make sure that you have one that doesn't kind of get harder and more difficult to use in cold weather. High and Dry's gels specifically is designed to penetrate the materials of the fly and work from the inside out, so it actually makes it an even more effective water barrier. It's designed to be great on all types of fly materials, including CDC, and it's formulated to handle temperature variances really well. You can be safe in knowing that you can use this all year round. To use the gel floatant, you simply apply the desired amount to your finger, and then you work it into the specific fibers or material of the fly that you prefer. And when you're applying it to hair like this hair here, you want to make sure that you're getting some of that floatant on each of the fibers, that you're spreading the fibers out so that they're not clumping together. A lot of people like to apply it just to the hair and avoid the shank or the hook, so that fly ends up floating on the water in a more natural way. The next form of floatant we're going to talk about is liquid floatant. Like the gel floatant, the liquid floatant is also hydrophobic or water hating. Generally speaking, most liquid floatants out there on the market are designed to be used as a pre-treatment, which means they're designed to be used well in advance of a fishing excursion so that there's time to dry in between the application and the use of those floatants. And the reason being is that most liquid floatants out there in the market are built with solvents, which just take a long time to dry. With high and dry liquid floatant, it's not solvent based, it's actually 100% pure floatant. So you don't need to worry about having that drying time that you need with the other liquid floatants out on the market. Liquid floatants are, generally speaking, just a great all-around floatant for those folks like me who are a little bit lazier, don't worry about dressing specific parts of the fly, just want to get the fly treated and get it out on the water. And if you do want to dress specific areas of the fly, the liquid floatant isn't your floatant. You're going to want to use the gel or a powder for that. Like the gel floatant, the high and dry liquid floatant actually penetrates those fly materials. And so once again, creating that more effective water barrier. And because of that, it works great on all materials, including CDC. Most liquids you got to pre-treat. The high and dry liquid floatant can actually go with you out on the water. You just simply take your fly, and with the wide opening, it's great for all sizes of flies, from small gnat patterns to large hopper or mouse patterns. But all you need to do is dip your fly in the floatant, pull it out, give it a couple shakes, and then a couple false casts to dry it off, and it's good to go and it's ready to go out in the water. It's that simple. The next form of floatant that High and Dry manufactures is a powdered floatant. High and Dry uses an applicator brush for their powdered floatant. In the early days of floatants, fly fishers typically had two choices, a gel floatant and a paste floatant. When CDC type materials, those more delicate materials, started to become more and more popular, the gel and the paste just didn't work very well and they clumped up that CDC material. So a powdered type floatant was designed to allow fly fishers to apply floatants to those more delicate materials. Because powder works great on CDC, it obviously works great on all other types of materials and all fly sizes. Similar to the gel, the brush allows fly fishermen and women to apply the floatant to specific areas of the fly, so it allows them to get a little bit more technical about the areas where the floatant is, unlike the liquid, which is just a simple dip and cast. The powder floatants work similar to like a balloon when you rub it on your head and stick it to a wall. They attach to the fly fibers and create a water barrier that way. Powders don't penetrate the fibers, and High and Dry's doesn't penetrate the fibers like High and Dry's liquid or gels do. High and Dry's powder floatant has what we call nanoparticle technology, which makes it the most effective floatant on the market for not only trapping existing air, but also creating that water barrier. High and Dry has done some soak test data that supports our contention. Our powdered floatant is the best on the market. All powdered floatants, and High and Dry's included, have a downside, and that's because they don't coat the fly similar to the gel or the liquids do. They eventually wash off and will need reapplication. To use the powdered floatant, you pull the brush out, and if you notice the material at the end of the brush here, pay attention to the other brush applied products out there. Not all brushes are created equal. High and Dry has designed their brush to hold the maximum amount of product possible so that you're getting all you can on that fly material. So to apply, you take your fly like the CDC smoke jumper here, and you work that floatant into the fly materials. Similar to the gel, you make sure you get every fly or every piece of material coated as possible. And then if you want to blow off the excess, you can. Similar to the gel, if you want to avoid the hook and the shank to give that fly a more natural float, the powdered floatant is perfect for that. Another tip is to apply the powdered floatant to your nymphs. Similar to how it works on the dry flies, it'll trap that existing air within that nymph fibers. And so it'll allow that nymph to bounce a little bit more under the water and give it a more lifelike pattern. The last product that we're going to discuss is kind of its own special category of product, and it's a powdered floatant with a desiccant. It's the standard High and Dry powdered floatant, but it also has a desiccant particles mixed in there. Desiccant particles are particles designed to absorb moisture. No matter what materials you use or what type of floatant you use, eventually your fly is going to become waterlogged or hopefully fish slime. And what the intent of a powdered floatant and desiccant combination is to dry your fly while simultaneously coating it with powder. And the reason you want to use the desiccant and powder combination is if you try to simply reapply a floatant to a waterlog or fish slime fly, you're actually going to trap in that water or trap in that fish slime, which obviously is counterproductive. When you're looking at a product that contains a desiccant element to it, you want to pay attention to the size of the desiccant particles. If you take a look at the other products out there, you'll notice that not all of them have the same size particles of desiccant. And what we've found is the larger desiccant particles do not dry the fly nearly as well and they're less effective. But we've also found that the larger desiccant particles tend to get trapped on the fly and can weigh that fly down, which once again is also counterproductive. The other consideration with a powdered floatant and desiccant is that it's not designed as a long-term solution. So it's not as effective as the other forms of floatant. What it's designed to do is prolong the life of a fish-slimed or a waterlogged fly, which means if you're out there and you're catching a bunch of fish and you don't want to take the time to switch out of flies and reapply a different type of floatant, or if you're fishing with your favorite fly, really good pattern, you don't want to cut it off and switch it out, the powdered floatant desiccant is great at extending the life of the fly and giving you several more casts before you either have to reapply the powdered floatant desiccant or finally make the switch to a new fly. One other consideration with desiccants is that by nature they are designed to absorb moisture, and they're limited in how much moisture that they can absorb. For example, High and Dry uses, in our mixture, we have what's called indicator crystals, which are colored crystals that change into a different color when the desiccant has absorbed the maximum amount of moisture it can take. One other consideration with desiccant is that, as I've said several times, it's by nature absorbing moisture, which means it also absorbs moisture out of the air. And so what High and Dry has done that no other brands have done is we apply a pressure seal to our bottles. That way, when that bottle's sitting there on that fly shop shelf, you know it's not absorbing all that moisture out of that air as it's sitting there, and when you buy it, you've got the best product you can get. To apply the powdered floatant and desiccant, you simply open the lid, you dip your fly into the bottle there, you gently close the lid so you don't pinch or tip it, you give that waterlog or fish slime fly a few shakes, open the lid, you pull it out, and you've got a dry fly that's completely coated in our powdered floatant. Now you can give it a few shakes, or you can blow off the excess if you prefer, and then you can get it right back out there in the water. At High and Dry, we generally recommend you use one of the three primary types of floatants, the gel, the liquid, or the powder, and then you supplement that, if needed, with the powdered floatant and desiccant. For example, I generally use the liquid floatant, but I'll always have a bottle of the powdered floatant and desiccant with me in those rare instances where I'm catching a lot of fish. Another question I'm asked quite often is, what makes High and Dry unique? What sets High and Dry apart from the other products out there? And I like to explain it this way. Traditionally, people who are buying floatants were given two options. You can either get the environmentally friendly stuff, which wasn't as effective, or you can get the solvent-based products, which were effective, they work great, but they're putting pollutants in our waters. And so we were founded by a couple of professional chemists that said, look, why can't we give the people the best of both worlds? We can give them environmentally friendly and effective. And so with their scientific approach, they developed and designed products that are the most effective products out there on the market. And they're the easiest to use, which means more time on the water. But they've also designed products that are environmentally friendly. It's not solvent-based, so you're not worried about putting those pollutants in the water. Do some research when you go out there and look for floatants next time, and smell the other floatants on the market. You can smell the fuel in those floatants. High and Dry doesn't have those. It has no VOCs. So what makes High and Dry unique? It's the comfort in knowing that you're buying a product that's environmentally friendly, but it's also the most effective. So you're getting more time on the water, more time fishing.